Hey guys, tonight we dive into royal classrooms, where your lessons could shape empires or get you dethroned. Picture this, you're not just any kid, you're the heir to a throne. The tutors aren't there to help you ace a pop quiz. They're there to stop you from getting conquered, overthrown, or, publicly humiliated at a royal banquet. One wrong answer could cost you more than just a bad grade. It could cost you your head. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing where these bedtime adventures are taking you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a palace corridor lined with cold stone walls. Your tiny shoes clicking against marble as the morning sun pours through high windows. You're not heading to a playground. You're reporting for royal education. The stakes? Oh, just your entire future. No pressure. Your first tutor waits with scrolls under one arm and a raised eyebrow that says, "Try me." Your lessons will cover more than reading and counting. You'll learn to rule people, yes, but also to rule time, weather, the battlefield, and sometimes even the stars. You'll practice sword swings between your writing drills. You'll be scolded for sloppy grammar and for misjudging a noble's expression. Historians still argue whether these royal classrooms were more nurturing or terrifying. Probably both. Royal education isn't one size fits all. It shifts, bends, and reforms across continents and centuries. But the basics, those stick. You'll need to master logic, the calendar, warfare, and politics. And you better memorize those family lineages like your life depends on it. Because it actually does. Imagine being a little prince in Egypt. You're led to a quiet chamber where scribes with shaved heads teach you how to read hieroglyphs. They hand you a reed brush and gently correct your strokes. But when you sneak a glance outside, you see the palace guards practicing with spears. And you know you'll be out there too, soon enough. Or maybe you're a Persian prince, watching the sunrise as you saddle your horse, practicing not just to ride, but to ride perfectly. Because anything less is embarrassing for royalty. You'll also study truth-telling, a fascinating requirement. Your word must be ironclad, but you'll later learn to cloak that iron in silk. Meanwhile, in India, you could be a royal child, kneeling before a scroll of the Mahabharata. Your teacher's voice wrapping around you as he speaks of dharma, duty, and war. You're told that battles aren't just won with strength, but with a mind honed by philosophy. You won't just learn how to fight, you'll learn why to fight. But let's not forget, you're a kid. You probably want to sneak sweets from the kitchen or throw pebbles into the royal fountains. You want to do literally anything else. But skipping lessons? Yeah, that's not on the schedule. You don't get to opt out of destiny. The Greeks had a particular obsession with starting royal education early. For them, the mind was like a fresh wax tablet, impressionable, easily molded. And in case you were wondering, they didn't believe in sugarcoating your future. You might be 5 years old, but you're already hearing lectures about mortality, honor, and the fragility of power. Bedtime stories? Try cautionary tales about kings who ruled poorly and lost their heads, literally. Historians still debate whether the Greeks were truly more rigorous in education than their neighbors, or whether they just wrote about it more passionately. Either way, your days would have been packed. Arithmetic in the morning, rhetoric before lunch, and a sneaky wrestling match squeezed in before evening philosophy. The common thread across all these ancient empires? The pressure. You're not studying because you're curious. You're studying because entire cities are counting on you. It's the kind of pressure that could turn you into Alexander the Great, or into a cautionary story muttered by courtiers for generations. And sure, your tutors want you to learn languages and court manners, but let's not kid ourselves. They also want you to survive. And survival in a palace is an art form all its own. In Rome, you'd be practicing oratory while memorizing the names of every senator who might support or betray you. You'd rehearse carefully crafted compliments, learning to make your words glitter just enough to win favor without sounding desperate. And if you think kids today have a tough navigating social circles, try doing it while wearing a toga and knowing that one misspoken phrase could send your family spiraling into disgrace. Even the smallest things mattered. Your posture, the way you walked, how you lifted a goblet, all trained, all rehearsed. You're a royal puppet mastering your own strings. A little dramatic? Maybe. But remember, you probably won't survive this. And then there's the fringe stuff, the strange little quirks of royal upbringing. Did you know Egyptian royals sometimes used crocodile dung-based sun protection? Yeah. Imagine being smeared with that before heading out to practice your chariot turns. Sweet, sweet royalty. In Persia, royal children might be assigned animal companions, not just pets, but animals symbolic of power. A falcon to teach sharpness, a horse to teach loyalty. But here's the quirky part. Some historians whisper that one Persian prince was assigned a goat. Whether that's a historical accident or some lost royal metaphor, we may never know. But honestly, I kind of hope it's true. And over in India, you might be taught to interpret dreams, not just yours, but those of the people around you. Because sometimes, ruling wasn't just about swords and taxes. It was about convincing people you understood the signs from the gods. Historians still argue whether these dream lessons were truly central to royal training or more of a side hobby. Either way, you probably kept a dream journal just in case. So, as you trail behind your tutor from chamber to chamber, you start to realize that royal education isn't really about you. It's about the throne. It's about the empire. You're the vessel being filled with knowledge, skills, and strategies, whether you like it or not. And while your days are packed with lessons, it's the nights that leave you awake, staring at the carved ceiling, wondering if you'll ever be good enough to carry the weight that everyone keeps reminding you is coming. You wake up before the sun, because in the royal timetable, sleeping in isn't an option. By the time the servants quietly shuffle in to dress you, yes, even your morning robe requires assistance. Your tutor is already waiting with a wooden tablet and an expression that says, "Today, we tackle the cosmos." Welcome to the ancient syllabus, where astronomy isn't just science, it's survival. Your day begins with numbers. In India, you might start with the Salva Sutras, those mathematical texts that help define geometry long before the Greeks showed up with their compasses and philosophical hair. You drag a string along the dusty courtyard to measure perfect right angles. It's not just for making temples straight. It's to align sacred fires, because the gods apparently appreciate good symmetry. And hey, maybe you will too, when those same precise measurements keep your royal architects from accidentally collapsing your future palace. Historians still argue whether the Salva Sutras were primarily spiritual guides or practical geometry textbooks disguised as religious tools. Probably both. Ancient people loved to double dip like that. Your tutor pulls out a new lesson. Aryabhata's work on algebra and planetary motion. The numbers twist and dance, not just showing you how to calculate eclipses, but how to predict them. Imagine the power in that. Picture a royal court frozen in awe as you, a child, quietly whisper, "An eclipse will happen at sundown." When it does, you don't just look clever, you look divine. But here's the quirky part. Aryabhata thought the Earth rotated on its axis way before it was cool. Some scholars loved it, some found it heretical. Historians still debate whether his ideas spread widely during his lifetime, or whether they were mostly ignored until later mathematicians caught on. Either way, you're learning them now, and it's blowing your young royal mind. The link between astronomy and power isn't subtle. In every culture, the stars are your advisors. You consult them before wars, before marriages, before planting crops. The Greeks eventually refined this cosmic obsession. They make it more systematic, more philosophical. A Macedonian prince like Alexander would study the stars not just to predict omens, but to understand the natural order, the cosmic hierarchy, where he's conveniently seated near the top. Your Greek tutor teaches you that mathematics isn't just arithmetic. It's a gateway to ruling the universe, or at least believing you can. Arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and even music are tied together in a harmonious package called the quadrivium. That's right, even your scales and melodies are tangled up in royal math class. Surprise, your terrible liar practice isn't just for family performances. It's training your brain to sense patterns. And just to keep you humble, your tutor slips in a side note. Oh, and by the way, the universe doesn't revolve around you. Not yet, anyway. But while the Greeks are busy debating the shapes of planets and the virtues of rulers, the Chinese imperial courts are quietly perfecting the practical side of celestial observation. You, as a young Chinese prince, spend hours with court astronomers learning to track lunar cycles, predict eclipses, and most importantly, manage the calendar. Why the obsession with calendars? Because if you control the calendar, you control time itself. You decide when festivals happen, when taxes are due, when soldiers march. Miss an eclipse prediction? Your subjects might think you've lost the mandate of heaven. And losing the mandate of heaven is the ancient royal equivalent of your phone dying at 1% in the middle of a power move. Historians still argue whether Chinese emperors truly believed in their cosmic roles, or whether it was a convenient narrative to hold on to power. Either way, they acted like they believed it. And you're being raised to carry that weight. Court astronomers are practically rock stars. They hold dangerous knowledge. Their charts and predictions can stabilize an empire or shatter it overnight. And as a prince, you're expected to understand just enough to know if your astronomers are lying to you. It's a delicate dance. Trust, but verify. Your astronomical studies aren't just about the heavens. They're about aligning rituals, planting schedules, and even war campaigns. A wise king consults the stars. An educated king can read them himself. And when you return to Persia, you notice something curious. Riding and archery dominate the curriculum, but astronomy is still lurking in the background, shaping when you ride, when you hunt, when you send messengers across the empire's sprawling roads. It turns out every royal court has its own spin on this cosmic education. You learn that in India, astronomical knowledge helps you set religious festivals. In Greece, it shapes your philosophical destiny. In China, it holds your right to rule. In Persia, it weaves through both power and poetry. Quirky royal trivia? Some ancient Chinese courts used intricate water clocks to measure time with breathtaking precision, sometimes down to seconds. Imagine a palace so silent you can hear the drip, drip, drip of your own destiny ticking away. And over in Egypt, royal astronomers observed Sirius, the bright star whose heliacal rising signaled the annual Nile flood, a life or death event. The battles, they aren't separate lessons. They're parts of the same crown you're being forced to grow into. Historians still argue about the degree of cross-cultural influence in these astronomical traditions. Did the Greeks inspire the Persians? Did Indian mathematicians spark Chinese reforms? Or did each empire arrive at its own cosmic conclusions independently? Honestly, no one agrees. But the stars, patient as ever, don't care. And as your lessons spiral on, you start to notice that your education isn't just about ruling people. It's about ruling time, space, and belief. You're not just memorizing the stars and tracing the paths of planets anymore. You're starting to see how all these cosmic lessons flow directly into something much more immediate: survival. Books may crown a ruler, but swords keep them on the throne. And no amount of stargazing will help you if your kingdom is snatched out from under you while you're busy admiring Saturn's rings. Royal education doesn't stop in the classroom. It marches directly onto the battlefield. You might imagine a royal child pampered in silks, nibbling figs while reciting poetry. Cute, but try that in Sparta, and you'd probably find yourself on kitchen duty, if you're lucky. In Sparta, royal boys enter the agoge, the state's famously brutal military academy, at the tender age of 7. You probably wouldn't survive your first breakfast there. Comfort is shredded from your life immediately. You're given thin cloaks in winter, rough bedding, and food that's scarce enough to encourage stealing. Oh, and here's the catch. If you get caught, you're not punished for the theft. You're punished for being bad at it. Stealth is part of the syllabus. Historians still argue whether Spartan royal boys were sometimes granted lighter training, or whether the whole point was to break them down just like everyone else. Either way, the sons of kings bled and bruised right alongside their future soldiers. Wasn't a glitch, it was a feature. Your days are consumed by endurance drills, hand-to-hand combat, wrestling, and battlefield tactics. You fight not just to win, but to endure. A misplaced word, a sloppy punch, even a flinch in the cold. These are lessons written directly onto your skin. Quirky detail? Spartan boys often trained by dancing. Yes, really. War dances built agility, rhythm, and unit cohesion. It wasn't about grace. It was about learning to move as one, to fight like a storm of spears instead of a scatter of scared kids. And this wasn't just a Spartan thing. Persia had its own flavor of warrior education. If you're a Persian prince, your childhood mantra is riding, archery, and truth-telling, the 3 R's of Persian nobility. Your riding lessons aren't casual pony strolls. You're mastering horseback maneuvering at full speed, training for royal hunts that double as live fire drills. You ride to shoot, you shoot to hunt, you hunt to fight. And the prey? Sometimes deer, sometimes lions. Occasionally, terrifyingly, you're tasked with taming your horse bareback because saddles are apparently for amateurs. Historians still debate whether these royal hunts were primarily military preparation or elaborate displays of royal charisma. Probably both. In Persia, archery is more than a weapon. It's a signature. A prince who can't string his own bow is basically a walking scandal. And then there's the truth-telling. Sounds simple, right? But in Persia, truth-telling is a sacred skill. It's not just about honesty. It's about clarity, loyalty, and knowing how to stand by your word, even when it's uncomfortable. You're drilled to speak plainly, to resist the seductive squishiness of half-truths. Except, plot twist, you'll also have to learn how to dodge palace intrigue later. But for now, your tutors keep hammering. Words are arrows, so aim carefully. Meanwhile, over in India, the royal curriculum is soaked in the martial science of Dhanurveda, a comprehensive training that goes beyond just poking things with sharp sticks. You're wielding swords, spears, maces, and bows, but you're also drilling in battlefield formations, chariot maneuvering, and the delicate art of not accidentally knocking yourself out with a flailing weapon. You study epic texts like the Mahabharata, not just for the hero stories, but for the strategies and philosophies buried inside. The Mahabharata doesn't just tell you how to fight. It makes you ask why you're fighting, what duty demands, and whether victory is worth the cost. Heavy stuff for a kid still growing into their sandals. Quirky side note, some Royal Indian students trained with weighted weapons, heavier than what they'd use in battle, so that when real combat came, their arms would feel lightning fast by comparison. Talk about a royal cheat code. Historians still debate how widespread or standardized this Dhanurveda training was among the royal classes. Was it strictly for warriors, or did every noble child get shoved into the sparring ring? We can only guess from scattered texts and temple carvings. Now, let's detour to Egypt and Mesopotamia, where royal children aren't just taught to sit on golden thrones looking intimidating. They train with chariots, ancient war machines that require serious skill to control. Studying the lives of generals, understanding their triumphs and their catastrophic mistakes. Young Julius Caesar, he didn't just master rhetoric and law. He trained for war, sweating alongside soldiers, learning exactly how to win their respect. The quirk? Roman elite boys were often expected to sleep on hard pallets and wake before dawn, even if their homes had enough silk cushions to drown in. Historians still debate whether Julius Caesar's military excellence was baked in from childhood, or whether his raw ambition simply turbocharged his education. Probably both. Either way, you're learning that in Rome, a prince's pen and sword are equally sharp and equally dangerous. Even in ancient China, where the imperial court is often wrapped in layers of careful ceremony, military education is baked into your upbringing. Martial arts, archery, horseback riding, check, check, check. You're expected to practice these, not just for fitness, but because the ideal ruler embodies both civil and military virtues, the when and the wu. And just because your life is wrapped in scrolls and etiquette doesn't mean you get to skip the bruises. A prince who can't shoot straight or ride well risks losing face, and maybe more. Historians still argue whether Chinese princes were expected to lead armies personally, or whether they more often delegated to generals. The evidence is mixed, but either way, the education is the same. You're preparing for both the boardroom and the battlefield. And here's the common thread. No matter where you're born, royal childhood is not a gentle ride. It's a crucible. The message is clear. If you can't defend your kingdom, someone else will happily take it off your hands. Your survival manual isn't just a list of sword drills and riding lessons. It's a relentless preparation for the day when someone calls your bluff. And trust me, someone will. You're still catching your breath from all those battlefield drills when you realize fighting isn't just about muscle and swords. In the royal world, words can cut deeper than blades. And etiquette? It's not just politeness, it's survival armor. You step into a royal court, and it's like stepping into a minefield, except the mines are hidden in handshakes, glances, and the way you fold your robe. Every word, every gesture can start a war or stop one. Forget one bow, mispronounce a noble's name, or sit before you're told, and suddenly, You're not just the rude kid in the room. You're a political liability. In ancient China, the rules are absolutely smothering. You're expected to memorize the Li, the ritual codes that dictate how to move, when to speak, how to grieve, even how wide your sleeves should hang during certain ceremonies. Mess it up? At best, you'll get a scolding. At worst, you've just committed symbolic treason. You're always one step away from disaster. Quirky detail? In some periods of the Han Dynasty, if you sneezed loudly in the emperor's presence, it could spark awkward debates about whether you just committed an omen-worthy offense or merely had dust in your nose. Historians still argue whether these sneeze-based blunders were genuinely feared or exaggerated by later storytellers. And it's not just about knowing the rules. It's about performing them with precision, with grace. You're trained to move like flowing ink, to speak in measured tones, to keep your emotions locked behind a dignified mask. You're basically rehearsing to become a living statue, all while making sure you know exactly who's trying to step on your toes politically. Over in Persia, etiquette is its own strategic battlefield. Royal children are carefully groomed, not just in how to dress, but in how to carry themselves in the presence of envoys and foreign ambassadors. It's all about appearing calm, poised, and present, untouchable, even when someone's hurling subtle insults at you. You're taught to respond without responding, to deflect with elegant phrases that can be read two ways, to speak in political riddles wrapped in compliments. Historians still debate how much real influence Persian royal children had over court decisions before they reached adulthood. But one thing's clear: you're never too young to start learning the dance of survival. And oh, the palace is crawling with spies. That smiling servant, that friendly guard, that harmless musician, yeah, they're probably reporting your every sneeze and sigh to someone. So your tutors teach you to speak in layers, to signal what you mean without saying it directly, to hide your true thoughts behind a polite smile. The quirk? Persian royals were expected to be skilled at polite weeping. Yes, trained crying on cue, especially during formal mourning rituals. Tears weren't just feelings, they were political theater. Meanwhile, in India, you're diving into the Niti Sastra, the science of ethics, governance, and courtcraft. Texts like the Artha Shastra teach you that diplomacy is a game of shadows. It's not just about what you say, but what you don't say. Royal heirs learn about espionage, alliances, bribery, and how to sniff out betrayal before it poisons the court. You're drilled to understand that kings don't just swing swords. They gather informants, manipulate rivalries, and sometimes make friends with the very enemies they plan to conquer later. Historians still argue whether Kautilya's Arthashastra was a widespread training manual for princes or a more theoretical text. But its core lessons? Unmistakable. A naive ruler is a doomed ruler. Quirky side note? Some ancient Indian courts trained young royals in using riddles and parables to deliver political advice. If you're too blunt, you risk offending your elders or exposing yourself. Speak in riddles? You might just outmaneuver your opponents. And now, pivot to Greece and Rome, where the art of charm and manipulation gets its own sparkle. In Athens, elite boys are trained in charis, personal grace, and the ability to win hearts as well as arguments. You don't just need to be smart, you need to be likable. A careless insult, a flash of arrogance, even a yawn at the wrong time can make or break an alliance. Historians still argue whether charis was more about genuine charisma or well-practiced public performance. Probably both. You learn to flatter without groveling, to argue fiercely but gracefully, to charm a room without seeming desperate. You're not just trying to win, you're trying to make people want you to win. In Rome, it's even more layered. A young patrician is expected to master urbanitas, the art of being refined, witty, and socially nimble. Julius Caesar, he wasn't just swinging swords and scribbling speeches. He was trained to read body language, to spot political weaknesses, to understand when a man's trembling lip meant fear or ambition. Quirky Roman tidbit: Roman boys were sometimes trained to deliver fake pleas for mercy as practice for courtroom speeches. Yes, they literally practiced losing arguments to sharpen their empathy and improvisation skills. And while you're learning to bow, banter, and bargain, don't forget, etiquette is also camouflage. Beneath the silks and speeches, there's always a dagger. Your tutors quietly slip in lessons about palace espionage, how to test loyalty with small, and yes, this training isn't just for boys. Royal daughters, future queen consorts, regents, or even sovereigns are drilled in all of this too. Cleopatra, Wu Zetian, Hatshepsut, they didn't stumble into power by accident. They survived by mastering this perilous etiquette, this careful threading of words and glances. In Egypt, where the pharaoh isn't just a king, but a god, etiquette becomes almost supernatural. Royal children are trained to hold themselves with serene dignity at all times. No fidgeting, no angry outbursts. Your body is seen as a sacred vessel, a walking symbol of cosmic order. Even your stillness is a political statement. To flinch, to slump, to show impatience, it's like cracking the sky. Quirky Egyptian detail: pharaohs sometimes performed sacred walking rituals where the pace and posture of their steps were choreographed to align with celestial patterns. Imagine being trained as a child to pace like the sun moving across the sky. It's not just walking, it's cosmic theater. So here you are. The battlefield has followed you into the banquet hall. Every smile is a strategy, every silence a signal, and always, behind the incense and the embroidered robes, someone is watching you watch them. But etiquette and espionage? They're just the opening moves. Your education isn't complete until you can hold your own in the war of words, ideas, and governing philosophies. Because believe it or not, ruling an empire requires more than just not tripping over your ceremonial sandals. You're now steeped in statecraft, diving headfirst into books thicker than your royal mattress. Your tutors don't just teach you how to rule, they teach you why. And more importantly, how to survive doing it. In India, you're tackling the Arthashastra like it's your battle manual, your family cookbook, and your emergency escape plan all in one. This ancient political treatise tells you how to build cities, tax your people, keep your soldiers loyal, and yes, how to poison your enemies if things get really awkward at court. Historians still debate whether the Arthashastra was written as an actual guide for rulers, or more, as a theoretical wish list for ideal governance. Either way, you're memorizing it like your life depends on it. Spoiler, it probably does. Quirky side note, the Arthashastra doesn't shy away from dirty tricks. It straight up suggests planting beautiful spies in rival courts to seduce and destabilize. Imagine your tutor gently explaining how to hire attractive secret agents while you're still trying to master multiplication tables. Over in Greece, your brain is stretching in new directions. You're studying the works of Plato and Aristotle, not optional reading for a prince. You wrestle with questions about justice, the ideal state, and whether rulers should serve the people or shape them like potters with wet clay. Your head's probably spinning, but this is the stuff that turns a warlord into a philosopher king. Historians still argue whether these classical philosophers really influenced everyday rulers, or whether their teachings mostly gathered dust on library shelves. But if you're lucky, or unlucky, like Alexander the Great, But you're personally tutored by Aristotle himself, who's not here to coddle you. He's here to light a fire in your mind that'll burn across continents. The quirky bit? Aristotle taught Alexander about the natural sciences too, including which plants could cure you and which could kill you. Because even when you're conquering the world, it pays to know your herbs. And then there's Rome, where you're practically born into a live-action political chess game. You don't just study Cicero's speeches, you rehearse them, you live them. You practice winning arguments, yes, but also losing them gracefully. You're learning the Roman art of auctoritas, building personal influence through reputation, gravitas, and carefully curated networks. It's less about formal power and more about soft control. You're not just aiming to sit on the throne. You want people to need you to sit there. Historians still debate whether auctoritas could genuinely override formal political rank, but Roman elites certainly believed in its power. It's like being the kid who's not officially in charge of the playground, but everyone knows you're the one who decides who gets to use the swings. Quirky Roman detail? Aspiring rulers practice delivering fake public apologies for things they didn't do, just to master the art of appearing both humble and invincible. Sorry Not Sorry, the royal edition. Meanwhile, in Persia, you're soaking in the practical mechanics of empire. Land management, taxation, controlling distant satrapies, provincial governors, and ensuring that the royal road stays open and safe for messengers. You're taught to manage not just soldiers, but grain supplies, trade routes, and climate patterns. The Persian education hammers home one brutal truth: an empire doesn't collapse in a battlefield. It crumbles when food doesn't arrive. So yes, you're expected to know more than just the weight of a sword. You need to understand the weight of wheat shipments. Historians still argue whether Persian princes had real administrative power before becoming kings, or whether they were kept in a golden cage of ceremonial duties. But the fact that they were trained in these responsibilities says plenty. And here's your quirky moment. Persian royals were taught to memorize complex oaths of loyalty that had to be recited word for word during ceremonies. Flub a single phrase, and the whole ritual was void. Imagine standing there with everyone staring, sweating through your tunic because you forgot whether it was eternal dominion or everlasting dominion. In China, you're diving deep into Confucian classics, the backbone of imperial statecraft. You're taught that a ruler must embody Ren, humaneness and moral integrity. But you're also taught Fa, strict laws and punishments. It's a tightrope walk between being loved and being feared, and you better believe your tutors expect you to master both. The emperor isn't just a king. He's the axis around which heaven and earth spin. If you mess up, it's not just your reputation on the line, it's cosmic harmony. Historians still debate whether Confucian ideals genuinely restrained emperors or just gave them a polite script to ignore when it suited them. Either way, you're trained to appear as the ultimate moral compass, even when you're quietly scheming. Quirky Chinese tidbit: young princes were often required to compose impromptu poems as part of diplomatic meetings. Nothing says future emperor like freestyling a haiku about the weather while negotiating border disputes. And of course, across all these empires, one thing's universal. You're constantly reminded that words can build kingdoms, but also destroy them. One wrong decree, one ill-timed joke, one public stumble, and suddenly your rivals have all the ammunition they need. So you practice, over and over, in private chambers lined with scrolls, peer under the watchful eyes of tutors who know that grooming you is not just a job, it's the security system for the entire empire. And then there's the dangerous art of listening. You're taught how to eavesdrop politely, how to encourage gossip without seeming nosy, how to extract secrets by appearing indifferent. Remember that flute player in the garden? He's not just here for ambiance. He's probably here to record who whispered what to whom. Historians still argue whether palace spying was an official curriculum or an inevitable survival skill learned on the fly. But your tutors make one thing clear. If you don't listen carefully, you'll miss the dagger sliding toward your back. And that's the thing. You're not just memorizing texts or learning to manage grain. You're learning how to manage people. And people, they're messy, unpredictable, and often out for themselves. But with the right words, the right look, and the right silence, you can guide them, win them, maybe even outsmart them. Your royal education is sculpting you into something dangerous. Not just a ruler, but a strategist, a chess master with human pieces. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll learn what happens when you start moving those pieces yourself. But for now, you're still the student, and your training isn't finished. Not until you face your final, most delicate trial, mastering the subtle battlefield of royal etiquette and the perilous art of public presence. If you thought sword fighting was dangerous, wait until you learn how sitting in the wrong chair can start a war. Every movement you make in the palace is scrutinized. From the way you walk to where you sit, how long you hold someone's gaze, even how you fold your hands, all of it speaks volumes in the silent language of power. In some courts, like Han China, it's almost comically rigid. The Li ritual codes govern every gesture, every step, every breath. One extra syllable in a greeting, one hasty sip of tea, and suddenly you've committed a grave insult, the kind that can cascade into diplomatic disaster. Historians still argue whether these strict codes genuinely maintain stability or just provided more traps for ambitious courtiers. The quirky bit? These rules weren't just enforced during grand ceremonies. Even at casual meals, a prince might be expected to pause precisely 3 seconds after his superior has finished speaking before he can laugh at a joke. Yes, there was literally a correct way to laugh. In Persia, the subtleties of etiquette could be life or death lessons. You're not just learning how to bow, you're practicing the angles, the pace, the emotional temperature behind the gesture. Persian royals are expected to radiate composed strength, to wield silence like a blade, and to answer insults with elegant indirection. Losing your temper? That's for peasants. Historians still argue whether the famed Persian poise was natural or drilled in so ruthlessly that princes simply forgot how to express anything else. But the result is the same. You're taught to wear your face like armor. Quirky Persian detail? Royal children sometimes rehearsed accidental meetings with foreign envoys. Scripted casual encounters, staged to test their ability to deliver subtle barbs while appearing friendly. It's like live-action chess, but with more jewels and veiled insults. In India, the court's educational stage doubles as a theater of survival. You're schooled in Natya Shastra, the science of performance, not just for entertainment, but as a political survival kit. You learn how to project humility without ceding power, how to flatter without surrendering, and how to deploy charm like a dagger tucked behind a smile. Your training leans heavily on the importance of Maya, illusion, and niti, diplomacy. You practice how to deflect a question with a question, how to appear open while revealing nothing. Historians still argue whether Indian royal etiquette softened rulers into manipulators or merely armed them for a world that would chew them alive if they blinked. Here's your quirky nugget. royal children were sometimes taught to feign fainting spells during negotiations gone sour. Why? To reset the tension, diffuse aggression, and buy their side time. Nothing stops a heated argument like a dramatic collapse. Over in Greece, the social dance is less about ritual precision and more about personal charisma, charis, the elusive charm that makes people want to follow you. You rehearse graceful movement, controlled speech, and the subtle art of pretending you're not in control, while actually pulling every string. Athenian elites are obsessed with public image. They debate whether true leadership is about virtue or the ability to perform virtue convincingly. Historians still argue whether these lessons produced genuinely benevolent leaders or just very talented liars. And your quirky detail? Young Greek nobles sometimes trained by staging mock symposia, lavish drinking parties where the real lesson wasn't wine appreciation, but how to steer political conversations while pretending to be just tipsy enough not to seem calculating. In Rome, etiquette is a living weapon. You don't just learn how to enter a Senate hall. You learn how many steps to take, how far to nod, when to pretend not to notice a rival. Julius Caesar himself likely practiced these steps as carefully as his battlefield formations. Roman etiquette is brutal in its efficiency. The wrong handshake, the wrong seating arrangement, even the wrong dinner guest can cascade into political chaos. Historians still argue whether these rigid social codes were sincerely respected or mainly exploited by power players who memorized every loophole. Quirky Roman tidbit? Boys of noble birth often practiced delivering carefully calculated compliments to statues of gods. Why? Because if you could master the correct tone, expression, and level of reverence to an unblinking marble face, you were ready to handle real senators. And while you're navigating these silent wars, remember, nothing in the royal court is ever what it seems. Behind every banquet, every festival, every polite invitation is a tangle of hidden alliances and quiet surveillance. Your tutors remind you, the walls have ears, but so do the flowers, the musicians, the kitchen servants. In fact, in many courts, young royals are explicitly taught to stage conversations near decorative plants, because sometimes those ferns are hiding spies. Historians still argue whether these lessons in casual paranoia were exaggerated or simply necessary in worlds where ambition moved faster than loyalty. Your quirky moment? Some royal children carried pet birds, parrots and mynas, not just as exotic companions, but as living tape recorders. These birds were trained to mimic overheard phrases, sometimes exposing private conversations days later. You think your phone's listening to you? Try a royal cockatoo. As you practice your etiquette drills, you're also taught the dangerous art of indirect speech. The real power isn't in what you say, it's in what you imply. A prince who can craft a sentence with just enough ambiguity to offer both threat and deniability? That's a prince who will survive. You rehearse how to deliver layered statements, how to issue a compliment that can be read as a warning, how to invite someone to dinner while making them wonder if they'll leave with a belly full of food or a dagger between the ribs. Your tutors stage mock banquets where every glance, every toast, every casual joke is a coded message. They even teach you how to test for poison, not just in your wine, but in your words. If someone praises you too much, too fast, that's not admiration, it's bait. And woven through all of this is the endless reminder. Your posture isn't just posture, it's policy. How you stand, where you look, how long you hold silence. These are your declarations of power, as binding as any royal seal. Historians still argue whether these layers of etiquette truly protected monarchies or simply delayed their inevitable falls. But in your world, etiquette isn't fluff, it's armor. You finish your day by walking the palace halls with books balanced on your head, not just for grace, but to practice moving through the weight of expectations. You nod to the courtiers, you offer the correct smile to the foreign dignitary, and you pause just long enough in the garden to listen to that flute player, who's probably reporting on you even now. Because one day soon, you won't just perform these rituals, you'll weaponize them. The next layer of your royal education pulls you deeper into the shadowy web of power, into the secret art of palace espionage. Because in every glittering court, no matter how polished the marble floors or how fragrant the air from the hanging gardens, someone is always watching you. And soon, you'll be trained to watch them right back. Your tutors no longer speak in hypotheticals. They tell you plainly, trust no one fully. Not your friends, not your cousins, sometimes not even your siblings. In the world of ancient royalty, the real war isn't just on the battlefield. It's at the dinner table, in the whispered corridors, in the unreadable glance from a servant passing you tea. It's subtle, it's constant, and it's the quietest people who usually win. You learn to plant information, tiny seeds of falsehood, to see which servant, which advisor, which uncle repeats it back. Historians still argue whether some rulers became so paranoid they saw betrayal where there was none, or whether their constant vigilance genuinely saved their crowns. Maybe both. Here's your quirky detail. Some Persian princes practiced a trick called echo baiting. You would casually mention a fake secret in the presence of carefully chosen servants, just to see where the rumor would echo back from. If the same false story returned to your ears through a distant courtier, you just macked one strand of the invisible web. In India, you dive into the Arthasastra's chilling chapters about espionage, deception, and counterintelligence. You memorize the categories of spies, living spies, dead spies, double agents. You study how to use merchants, entertainers, even ascetics as informants. The Arthashastra doesn't sugarcoat it. Sometimes the best way to protect your crown is to betray before you're betrayed. Your quirky lesson? Royal tutors sometimes disguise themselves as wandering monks or foreign traders to secretly test a prince's ability to extract information, spot deception, ... or survive a staged ambush. Imagine sitting calmly in court while you realize the street musician you tipped 2 days ago is actually your tutor in disguise. The Greeks elevate espionage into a cerebral sport. You're not just watching people, you're watching their words, their logic, their silences. A well-trained Athenian noble can read between the lines like a detective with X-ray vision. The Greeks believe knowledge is power, but applied knowledge, that's survival. Historians still argue whether Athenian elites truly mastered this psychological chess, or whether they just became adept at appearing to understand more than they did. But either way, you learn that in Athens, power is often hidden in the smallest gesture, the briefest hesitation. Your quirky tidbit? Young Athenian nobles sometimes played a secretive game called Whispers of the Assembly, where they would pass a coded message through a chain of messengers and track how the meaning changed by the time it returned. A hands-on lesson in how quickly truth dissolves in a political court. In Rome, the stakes of palace espionage feel volcanic. Here, betrayal isn't rare, it's expected. Roman noble boys like you are trained in the careful arts of public listening, not just hearing what's said, but decoding what's carefully unsaid. You learn to maintain a half-lidded gaze, to sip your wine without fully closing your eyes, to remember every detail of who stood where and who smiled at whom during the banquet. Historians still argue whether Roman rulers like Nero descended into madness because they were raised on this constant diet of paranoia, or whether the paranoia was fully justified in a world where daggers outnumbered olive branches. Quirky Roman detail? Royal children sometimes trained by playing a game called Shadow's Edge, where they'd walk crowded markets wearing a bright token like a ribbon or pin, tasking a hand. If the follower could get within arm's reach undetected, the prince lost. If not, he won that round. You probably won't be surprised to hear that those who excelled at this game often became Rome's most cunning senators, or its most dangerous emperors. In Egypt, you're taught that espionage isn't merely a survival tool. It's almost sacred. After all, the pharaoh isn't just a ruler, he's a living god, and the god's safety is the nation's safety. Egyptian royal children learn early that information flows like the Nile. It can nourish your power or drown you if it floods uncontrolled. Historians still argue whether Egyptian princes like Ramses II truly led secret networks of spies, or whether later scribes exaggerated their reach to glorify the throne. But your tutors don't gamble on the difference. Your quirky tidbit? Some royal Egyptian children practiced eavesdropping while seated behind decorative papyrus screens, deliberately placed near high-ranking guests. They learned to blend their breathing with the rustle of the reeds to stay perfectly unnoticed, literally hiding in plain sight. And then there's the curious layer of hidden informants within the palace staff. You're taught to categorize everyone. Some are loyal, some are spies, some are loyal spies, and some are neither. Gardeners? Often overlooked, but they hear everything. Musicians? Frequently bribed. Kitchen staff? Potentially lethal, especially when soup's involved. Your quirky lesson? In some ancient courts, royal children practiced false servant drills. They would be told that all the servants for the day were secretly switched with spies. The child's task? To navigate the day, pick up the subtle cues, and correctly identify who was an imposter before sundown. High stakes for what might seem like a game. You're also trained to send coded messages yourself, carved into wax tablets under false layers, woven into the stitching of garments, hidden in innocuous poetry. Even the way you choose the color of a flower in a gift could carry secret instructions. Historians still argue whether these intricate codes were consistently effective or whether more often than not, the intended recipient simply didn't get the hint. But still, you learned them, because missing the hint could cost you your life. In China, the web of espionage is delicately interlaced with the grand machinery of the bureaucracy. You practice reading reports for what they omit, not just for what they say. You learn that the messenger's choice of words, whether they say rapid growth or sudden expansion, can hint at subtle power shifts. Quirky Chinese tidbit? Some royal children trained with a curious device, caged crickets. Not because they loved insects, but because crickets are hypersensitive to movement and vibrations. If your cricket stopped singing when someone entered the room, you'd been silently approached. These little creatures became living alarm systems. By now, your daily life feels like walking a tightrope over an ocean of whispers. Every smile hides a ledger, every embrace might be a probe, and every gift is possibly a test. And you're not just surviving, you're playing the game, learning to leave traps of your own, weaving false trails, mastering the invisible dance. Remember those early lessons with swords and scrolls? They were loud, they were obvious, but this quiet survival, This palace espionage, it's the sharpest weapon you'll ever wield, and the one you'll never see coming when it's turned against you. Your royal education now pulls you towards something you can't afford to ignore: the brutal politics of marriage and alliances. Because in the ancient world, your heart isn't yours to give. It's a bargaining chip, a weapon, a chess piece that can either secure your kingdom or doom it. You're told early, love is optional, but marriage is not. Your tutors begin weaving your understanding of alliances like a delicate spider's web. You learn how a single union can tie together feuding tribes, smooth over border disputes, or, if you're not careful, ignite new wars. And you're not just learning in theory, you're watching it unfold around you as cousins, siblings, and even toddlers are promised in marriage to solidify treaties before they can even pronounce the word alliance. Historians still argue whether these ancient betrothals were truly effective peacekeepers or just temporary bandages over deeper hostilities. But whether they worked or not, you'll soon learn that rejecting the wrong suitor can unravel an empire faster than losing a battle. In Egypt, your marriage isn't simply a family affair. It's a cosmic contract. Pharaohs often marry within their own family, yes, including siblings, not just to keep the royal bloodline pure, but to reinforce the pharaoh's status as a living god. You probably won't survive this twist if you're squeamish. But in ancient Egypt, the line between family tree and family circle is practically a loop. Quirky detail? Some royal Egyptian children were raised alongside their future spouses from infancy, with specific games and rituals designed to prepare them for eventual marriage. Imagine growing up with your cousin and knowing, oh, by the way, you'll be married to them before you can grow a proper beard. Your tutors carefully explain the difference between political marriages and personal unions. You're told which princesses from foreign lands come with dowries rich in gold, and which come with the dangerous weight of their family's military backing. In Persia, royal marriages are tools of empire building. You study how Persian kings like Darius sealed alliances by marrying daughters of rival kings, and even offering their own sisters and daughters to solidify new loyalty networks. Historians still argue whether these marriages were embraced or resented by the women involved, though the silence of most ancient records leaves us guessing. Your quirky tidbit? In some Persian courts, marriage negotiations could take years, with envoys trading embroidered fabrics, rare spices, and even prized horses as part of the marital prelude, sometimes long before the bride and groom had even seen each other. But wait, what if you're a royal woman? You're no less a pawn, but you're also no less powerful. In fact, your marriage might carry even more political weight than a prince's. Queen's consort, regents, and royal daughters often wield influence that rivals the kings themselves, especially in cultures where their marriages could swing the balance of entire coalitions. Take Cleopatra, for example. She isn't just famous for her charisma and daring. She's a masterclass in using marriage, alliance, and even public romance to keep Egypt on the world stage. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's relationships with Roman leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were driven more by personal affection or ruthless statecraft. But either way, she played the game like a grandmaster. Quirky fact? Cleopatra was multilingual, fluent in at least 9 languages, which meant she could negotiate directly with more foreign powers than most rulers of her day. No translator required, just sharp wit and sharper strategy. In Greece, your tutors emphasize the delicate dance of public perception in marriage. An Athenian noble doesn't just marry for land, he marries for reputation. The right family tie can elevate your social standing overnight. The wrong one can turn you into the subject of dinner party snickers. You're trained to decode guest lists at banquets, to see which families dine together, which ones conspicuously don't, and which marriages are walking on the edge of scandal. Historians still argue whether these intermarriages between rival city-states genuinely reduced conflict, or whether they simply shifted the battlegrounds from the field to the family home. Quirky Greek tidbit: Athenian elites sometimes exchanged dowry lists that were as detailed as modern spreadsheets, including not just assets, but furniture, household slaves, and sometimes even future promises of additional goods tied to the success of upcoming harvests. Your marriage was literally an inventory transaction. In Rome, your marriage isn't yours to arrange, it's your family's. Your tutors drill into you that a good marriage is less about affection and more about securing allies in the Senate, expanding influence in the provinces, and outmaneuvering your rivals' networks. Julius Caesar, remember him? His daughter Julia was married to Pompey the Great to cement a political alliance. When she died unexpectedly, historians still argue whether this personal tragedy directly contributed to the collapse of the First Triumvirate and the civil war that followed. Love matters, but in ancient Rome, alliances matter more. Quirky Roman detail? Engagements in Rome were sometimes sealed not with a ring, but with the symbolic exchange of iron tokens called arha. If either party broke the engagement, the arha was forfeited. Essentially an ancient version of losing your security deposit. And in India, your tutors steep you in the complex marriage protocols woven through the Mahabharata and other epic tales. You learn that the right marriage can avert a war, but the wrong one can unleash it. You study Draupadi, the princess who marries 5 brothers, igniting the events of the great Kurukshetra war. Historians still argue whether such polyandrous marriages were rare exceptions or more culturally embedded than we think. Your quirky Indian tidbit? Some royal weddings were preceded by months-long swayamvaras, public competitions where royal suitors showcased their skill in archery, wrestling, or debate to win the bride's hand. In one legendary account, a prince wins a princess by shooting a fish's eye while only looking at its reflection in water, a kind of ancient sniper test. Even in China, where Confucian hierarchy wraps everything in ritual, royal marriages are major diplomatic moves. You study how Han princesses were married off to steppe leaders as part of the Hekin peace treaties. Whether these unions actually secured long-lasting peace or simply delayed inevitable clashes, yep, historians still argue. Quirky Chinese detail? Some Chinese royal daughters sent abroad were accompanied by entire portable palaces, wooden structures carried by dozens of servants that could be rapidly assembled wherever the princess traveled. Imagine arriving at your wedding with your house in tow. Your lessons sharpen as you grow. Marriage isn't just a deal between 2 people. It's a living treaty, a political gamble, a potential time bomb with lace trim. You'll practice how to accept an unwanted betrothal with grace, how to smile while silently calculating whether your spouse's uncle might someday be your most dangerous enemy. And through it all, you're reminded, your personal happiness, it's optional. But your marriage, that's your duty. You quickly learn that your royal education is not just about what happens in palaces or on battlefields. It's also about the rhythms of the calendar, the secrets of the stars, and the way time itself can bend to your advantage. Your tutors sit you down to explain. In the ancient world, knowing when to act could be even more important than knowing how to act. In the calendar, it's not just for counting days. It's a weapon, a guide, a political tool. You're taught that eclipses can topple kings, that the phases of the moon might decide the launch of a military campaign, that harvest festivals are not just celebrations, but carefully timed displays of power. Historians still argue whether ancient rulers genuinely believed in these celestial signs or simply used them as convenient ways to manipulate public opinion. Either way, you're expected to understand them. Let's start with Mesopotamia. Here, scribes and priests have been tracking the stars for centuries. The royal calendar is carved into stone tablets, and court astronomers can predict eclipses with spooky accuracy. You learn quickly that if an eclipse happens on the wrong day, the king might perform a bizarre ritual, temporarily appointing a substitute king, often a prisoner, to absorb the bad omen. After the danger passes, the substitute is quietly let go. Yeah, you probably won't survive this part if you're picked for that job. Quirky Mesopotamian tidbit: some kings kept secret shadow calendars, parallel versions of the official timeline, just in case they needed to adjust dates for political advantage, like rescheduling a royal birth or making a military victory fall on an astrologically lucky day. In Egypt, you learn to respect the calendar as sacred. The annual flooding of the Nile isn't just a predictable event. It's the heartbeat of the entire kingdom. Your tutors teach you that priests use the heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star, to predict the floods. That moment wasn't just a date on a chart. It meant life or death for the food supply. Historians still argue whether Egyptian pharaohs genuinely mastered flood prediction, or whether they simply claimed credit for nature's rhythms to solidify their divine status. Either way, you're expected to look up at the stars with reverence and calculation. Quirky Egyptian fact: royal astrologers sometimes wore special star clocks painted inside coffins, which mapped out which deities guarded each hour of the night. Imagine snoozing under a personalized glow-in-the-dark star chart. But the stakes? Cosmic approval. In India, your education introduces you to the Surya Siddhanta, one of the world's oldest astronomical texts. You study how solar and lunar eclipses, planetary alignments, and auspicious timings, the muhurta, influence everything from war to weddings. A wise ruler, you're told, knows not to launch a siege during an inauspicious planetary hour because soldiers who march under the wrong stars might mutiny out of sheer superstition. Historians still argue whether these planetary warnings genuinely delayed campaigns, or whether kings simply used them as a convenient excuse for political hesitation. Quirky Indian detail: some Indian kings employed not just court astrologers, but entire teams of mathematical astronomers, Jyotisha masters, who could track celestial movements using nothing but sand drawings, water clocks, and complex tables written on palm leaves. When your lessons shift to China, the importance of the calendar explodes. In imperial courts, the emperor's ability to regulate the calendar is a symbol of his divine right to rule, the mandate of heaven. If the calendar slips out of sync with the seasons, that's a cosmic red flag. Peasants might rebel, believing the emperor has lost divine favor. Your tutors tell you chilling stories. In some dynasties, the chief calendar keeper could be executed for miscalculations. That's right, a math error could get you beheaded. You probably won't survive this job unless you triple check your work. Historians still argue whether the brutal enforcement of calendar accuracy actually improved timekeeping or simply terrorized mathematicians into silence. Quirky Chinese tidbit: some emperors personally reviewed the calendar drafts, using jade rulers and bronze compasses, treating the entire process like a sacred ritual rather than a bureaucratic chore. In Greece, the calendar is, well, a bit chaotic. Different city-states have different systems. Athenians use a lunar calendar that doesn't always align neatly with agricultural seasons. Your tutors walk you through the frequent intercalations, the insertion of extra months to realign the calendar, often decided by politicians who can be hilariously and dangerously corruptible. Historians still argue whether the Athenians' flexible calendar was a clever adaptation or a clumsy system that frequently invited manipulation. Quirky Greek fact: some ambitious Athenian leaders deliberately delayed or accelerated calendar adjustments to extend their own terms in office. Yep, rigging the calendar was the ancient version of moving your own promotion deadline. Over in Rome, you study the original Roman calendar, a baffling mess of 355 days, where officials called pontifices had the power to insert extra months when needed. This often turned into a political free-for-all. You probably won't survive the boredom of keeping track of which day it actually is. Your tutors guide you to the reforms of Julius Caesar, who, annoyed with the calendar's inaccuracy, introduced the Julian calendar, stretching the year to 365.25 days. This reform aligns Rome's calendar with the solar year, making harvests, festivals, and tax deadlines finally predictable. Historians still argue whether Caesar's calendar reform was primarily scientific or politically motivated to stabilize his grip on the empire. Quirky Roman detail? The new calendar added leap years, but early Roman bureaucrats fumbled the leap year rule so badly that Augustus had to pause leap years altogether to reset the rhythm. Time, it seems, is a tricky thing to govern. Your tutors show you that calendars aren't just about dates. They're about messaging. Rulers align their victories with holy festivals. They plan royal births to coincide with lucky omens. They order public works to be completed in time for religious holidays, making sure the people associate prosperity with the king's reign. You even study how some rulers backdate victories, declaring that a battle ended on a particularly sacred day, even if it didn't. Because when you control the calendar, you control the story. You learn to scan the sky for omens, to measure shadows with water clocks, to calculate the angle of the sun with bronze instruments that clink like wind chimes in your tutor's hands. Quirky cross-cultural tidbit: across ancient China, India, Persia, Greece, and Rome, rulers all shared a peculiar fixation with the spring equinox. That delicate moment when day and night balanced perfectly became a symbolic hinge for power. Announcing reforms, launching campaigns, or celebrating royal births at this celestial tipping point gave rulers a sense of cosmic harmony, or at least the appearance of it. Through it all, your royal education teaches you that a wise king doesn't just govern people, he governs time. He aligns his rule with the cycles of the moon, the tilt of the sun, and the whispers of the stars. Because if you can master the clockwork of the heavens, maybe, just maybe, you can hold your empire together a little longer. Time, you've learned, can be bent, managed, and manipulated. But now you realize that words carry just as much weight. In royal courts, the way you speak is as sharp as any sword, and sometimes even more dangerous. From the moment you could talk, your tutors have drilled you in the delicate art of speech, how to flatter, how to command, and most importantly, how to survive. Your early lessons are all about charis, that shimmering Greek ideal of personal charm, grace, and persuasive beauty. A prince or princess who speaks without it is practically handing their rivals the throne. You practice how to tilt your head just so, how to soften your voice at the right moment, how to appear both humble and commanding. Because in royal courts, the wrong tone is like stepping on a pressure plate. You probably won't survive what happens next. The Greeks knew this well. Athenian boys were sent to sophists, those sleek-tongued masters of rhetoric, to practice argument and public speech. You've spent hours learning to argue both sides of a case, just in case you need to pivot mid-debate. Historians still argue whether these rhetorical drills actually produced better leaders or just flashier liars. Quirky Greek tidbit? Some aristocratic children were taught to memorize entire speeches from plays, so they'd always have a tragic monologue ready to drop in at parties. Imagine using Euripides as your go-to icebreaker. In Rome, the stakes rise even higher. Your Roman tutors teach you that to rule is to persuade. Young aristocrats like Julius Caesar didn't just learn to fight. They spent years studying under rhetoricians, perfecting their posture, breathing, and the subtle art of the cutting insult wrapped in silk. You've been trained to read a man's ambition, not in his words, but in his pauses. To watch where his eyes flicker when you speak. Because in Roman politics, a misplaced glance can signal treason, or worse, opportunity. You've memorized the rhythms of Cicero, not just as a person, but as a style. Sharp, flowing, never quite letting your opponent grab hold of you. Historians still argue whether Rome's obsession with oratory genuinely elevated their leaders or simply created generations of power-hungry showmen. Quirky Roman detail? When giving public speeches, some Roman boys trained by holding pebbles in their mouths to correct a stammer. You can just picture it. A teenage noble, cheeks puffed out, droning on to a bored tutor while silently praying not to choke. In Persia, your lessons are a little different. You're taught that the art of speaking isn't always direct. Courtly language is layered, polite to the point of suffocation, and dripping with double meanings. A well-trained Persian prince knows how to compliment someone while lightly threatening them. You practice answering envoys with phrases so carefully constructed they could mean 3 different things depending on how they're heard. Historians still argue whether Persian diplomacy genuinely hinged on these elaborate verbal games, or if later historians romanticized their courtly speech. Quirky Persian tidbit? Royal children sometimes trained using coded poetry, learning to lace hidden meanings into verses that could pass through enemy hands without raising suspicion. In India, your studies pull you deep into the Niti Shastra, the science of politics and ethics. Your tutors walk you through moral dilemmas and sharpen your ability to twist through them like a river. You're taught to ask, what is the dharma of a king? And then, in the same breath, to ask, how can that dharma be flexible when survival demands it? In these lessons, you debate over texts like the Arthashastra, that ancient manual of espionage, diplomacy, and realpolitik. You learn how to plant spies, ... How to spin failure into victory. How to promise peace while sharpening your sword. Historians still argue whether the Arthashastra was widely implemented or whether it served more as an intellectual exercise in ideal governance. Quirky Indian detail? You memorize entire fables from the Panchatantra, animal stories with razor-sharp political lessons buried inside. You can just imagine a prince smiling sweetly while telling a story about greedy crows, all the while pointing that story straight at his uncle across the banquet table. In China, your speech training becomes a study in both restraint and nuance. The Confucian ideal teaches you to weigh every word as if the ancestors themselves were listening. You're drilled in the Li, ritual codes that tell you exactly how many degrees to bow, how to greet an elder, how to reply to a direct question with a polite sidestep. The emperor, you're told, must be like the pole star, still, steady, and yet commanding everything that revolves around him. So you practice not just speaking, but withholding. You're taught to let silence bloom like a lotus. Because in the Chinese court, silence can be as deadly as a blade. Historians still argue whether the Confucian model of self-restraint produced wiser rulers or simply more cautious ones who struggled to act decisively. Quirky Chinese tidbit: some royal children carried tiny jade mouthpieces to press against their teeth, a reminder to speak less and observe more. You realize quickly that royal speech isn't just for grand halls or battle councils. It's a weapon used over quiet meals, in sunlit gardens, in whispered conversations by carved screens. You're taught to spot traps and flattery, to hear the tension hiding beneath a smooth voice. Because every court is a maze of spies, and sometimes your own servants report your words before the echo fades. Quirky universal tidbit: across Persia, India, Greece, and China, the art of deflection, saying a lot while committing to nothing, is practically a shared royal language. You get good at answering a question with a story, responding to threats with parables, and promising everything while guaranteeing nothing. Your tutors never let you forget that words can outlive you. One careless insult can spark a rebellion. One poorly timed joke can make a powerful ally into a sworn enemy. You're taught the power of public proclamations, how to issue decrees that sound generous but bind your rivals tighter, how to construct oaths that trap the other side while leaving you a graceful exit, how to turn a treaty into a riddle no one can quite untangle. And behind it all, your training prepares you for the stage of the court, the endless banquets, ceremonies, and council meetings where one wrong word could ripple across kingdoms. Because in the royal world, silence is golden, but knowing exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to say it, that's survival. You realize now that mastering speech isn't just about sounding clever, it's about staying alive. But as you walk through the perfumed halls of power, with their whispered secrets and calculated smiles, you start to realize there's another layer, a quieter, slipperier battlefield that your tutors have been preparing you for all along: espionage. Because in a royal court, it isn't just about what's said, it's about what's overheard. You grow up knowing your words aren't private. Every attendant, every scribe, even the servants pouring your wine could be someone else's ears. You're taught to assume that someone is always listening, always watching. So you learn the double game, speaking truths dressed in riddles, making promises that are technically impossible to keep, dropping just enough breadcrumbs to mislead your enemies, but never enough to doom yourself. The first lesson you memorize is this: trust is currency, and trust can be faked. In India, the ancient Artha Shastra lays out entire sections on spying. You study the categories of informants, householders, merchants, wandering ascetics, ordinary people trained to blend in while quietly feeding information to the throne. You're taught that the wise ruler keeps multiple spies watching the same target, not because one might lie, but because most will. Historians still argue whether these sprawling spy networks described in the Arthashastra actually existed at the scale suggested, or if later scholars exaggerated their complexity. Quirky Indian tidbit: some spies disguised themselves as wandering storytellers, using epic recitations to both entertain and eavesdrop. You can just picture a court smiling politely at a traveling bard, oblivious that every heroic verse is a coded report. In Persia, your lessons include the famous King's Eyes and Ears system, a network of royal inspectors and informants who traveled the empire, reporting directly to the monarch. You're taught to use these watchers carefully to ensure loyalty without choking local rulers with fear. It's a delicate dance. You want the truth, but you also want loyalty. Historians still argue whether the Persian eyes and ears were an effective intelligence system or a form of royal theater meant to make the king seem omnipresent. Quirky Persian tidbit: some Persian spies were known to disguise themselves as low-ranking scribes, slipping into enemy courts by simply blending into the bureaucratic hum, because no one ever notices the guy sharpening quills. In Egypt, your lessons touch on the labyrinth of palace intrigue, where eunuchs, scribes, and even palace gardeners could become the kingmakers behind the throne. You're warned to watch the quiet ones, the ones who always seem to know the day's gossip first, the ones who bring you the right information just a little too quickly. Quirky Egyptian detail: there's evidence that some royal households use trained animals, yes, literal pigeons, to carry secret messages across palace grounds. Imagine whispering a dangerous secret to a bird, because it might actually be the most reliable messenger you have. In China, you're taught about the dense machinery of palace bureaucracy, a system so vast that spies often weren't planted. They simply emerged from the ranks of officials already in place. You study the concept of jian, remonstrance, the idea that your ministers should correct you. But of course, you also learn how to make sure those who correct you aren't quietly plotting your downfall. Historians still argue whether Chinese emperors genuinely encouraged honest remonstrance, or whether it was a polite fiction masking layers of mutual surveillance. Quirky Chinese tidbit: some emperors kept hidden scribes who followed them closely but never revealed their faces to anyone else. These scribes could record everything a ruler said and did, but they were also conveniently invisible to the rest of the court. Across the ancient world, your tutors drill you in counterintelligence. You learn to set traps, false decrees, staged conversations, planted scrolls, just to see who repeats them. You leave crumbs and wait to see which ones are gobbled up by spies lurking in shadowy corners. Sometimes, you intentionally say the wrong thing just to watch who carries it away. You learn to use your own servants as double agents. Your food taster isn't just there to save you from poison. They're also there to hear what the kitchen staff whispers about you. You start noticing which guards linger a little too long outside your chambers. Quirky universal tidbit: in many royal courts, rulers developed intricate hand signals or coded phrases to communicate in public without betraying true intentions. You can imagine walking through a crowd, making a small practiced gesture that instantly signals to your allies, proceed or abort. And espionage isn't just about defense. It's your greatest weapon. You send gifts to rival courts with hidden messages sewn into the seams. You dispatch envoys who are actually there to map out escape routes and measure courtyard distances in case you ever need to lay siege. You practice the game of false alliances, offering friendship while secretly bankrolling your enemy's enemy. You sponsor religious pilgrims who coincidentally seem to arrive at the most politically sensitive cities. Historians still argue whether royal children were directly involved in espionage planning, or whether this was typically reserved for their advisors until they reached the throne. But you're trained from childhood to see the invisible threads, to know that the man bowing before you might be the same man plotting your exile. you become skilled at layered conversations, where what's said aloud means one thing, but the pace, the gestures, the silences mean something else entirely. You learn to test loyalty without asking, to seed rumors without being traced. Quirky fringe tidbit. Some legends claim that in certain courts, perfume itself was weaponized, blended with memory-affecting herbs to loosen tongues or cloud judgment. Historians debate whether this was myth or a real, if highly experimental, form of espionage. Even your clothing becomes part of the game. You wear specific colors on specific days, not just for ritual, but to signal secret messages to watching allies. You arrange your jewelry to form patterns only certain eyes will understand. And always, always, you keep a careful record, not in the obvious scrolls anyone can find, but in personal ledgers hidden in your chambers, sometimes written in cipher, sometimes disguised as poetry or prayers. Because you're not just surviving your court, you're mapping it, moving through it like a fox in a warren of hunters. You're not paranoid, you're prepared. And that quiet, sleepless vigilance, that's just another part of the royal education no one outside the palace walls ever truly understands. You glide through the intricate halls of power with all these silent skills tucked neatly into your pocket. But there's one more arena your Rory education insists you master: the stage of diplomacy. Not the dusty treaties and long-winded speeches you might imagine, but the living, breathing theater of human persuasion, delicate flattery, and the art of saying no without ever using the word. Your tutors make you practice the handshake that lingers just long enough to feel warm, but not so long that it's desperate. You rehearse the perfect diplomatic smile, that subtle lift of the lips that says, "I see you, I respect you, but also, you probably shouldn't trust me." In Persia, your instructors remind you that gift-giving is its own language. A ruby is not just a gem. It's a weighty signal of favor or a calculated debt. A hunting falcon isn't just a pretty bird. It's a mobile, feathered bribe. Historians still argue whether Persian diplomacy leaned more on lavish gift exchanges or on sheer military intimidation, especially under Darius and Xerxes. Quirky Persian tidbit: some envoys carried letters on thin sheets of gold, rolled up and sealed. Because if you're going to deliver a message, why not make sure it shines while you do it? In ancient India, your education pulls you deep into the Niti Sastra, the science of politics. You memorize entire passages about 4 ways to deal with rivals: conciliation, gifts, sowing division, or outright force. You're drilled on how to blend all 4 without ever showing your hand. Historians still argue whether the multi-pronged diplomatic strategies described in texts like the Arthashastra were widely practiced or simply idealized statecraft theories. Quirky Indian tidbit: diplomatic meetings sometimes involved a game of dice, not just for leisure, but as a ritual where the outcome could influence the mood. With rulers feigning casual fortune while calculating every throw. The Greeks, they raised the game to near performance art. You spend hours learning the graceful pivot from philosophical banter to political maneuvering, the way Socratic questions can unravel an opponent's position without ever raising your voice. You practice the timing of a well-placed silence, just long enough to let your rival over-explain. Historians still argue whether the Greeks' love of public debate genuinely influenced foreign diplomacy, or if backroom deals carried just as much weight behind closed temple doors. Quirky Greek tidbit: some Greek city-states sent athletes as diplomatic gifts, offering champions to train with foreign armies as living tokens of goodwill. Imagine the pressure of being both an Olympic-level sprinter and a walking political pawn. In Rome, your tutors push you through endless drills in oratory. You learn to flatter senators without sounding subservient, to threaten without sounding crass. You practice delivering entire arguments where the real message only sits in the carefully chosen examples, in the metaphors that suggest your power without needing to declare it. Quirky Roman tidbit? Roman diplomats were notorious for traveling with elaborate portable chairs, so they could physically position themselves higher than their hosts, a subtle but clear signal of superiority. You can almost hear the groan of the servant tasked with lugging that chair over dusty roads. And in China? The delicate dance of the tributary system. You're taught how to receive envoys who are there not just to negotiate, but to symbolically kneel before the emperor, reinforcing the cosmic order. You rehearse the exact moment to offer tea, the precise way to phrase a welcome that sounds generous, but also clearly places you at the center of the universe. Historians still argue whether the tributary system was a rigid top-down structure, or if it masked more flexible, behind-the-scenes diplomacy. Quirky Chinese tidbit? Some diplomatic gifts included mechanical birds, little clockwork marvels designed to sing and move, early demonstrations of technological prestige, carefully wrapped in polite protocol. But diplomacy isn't just about the pageantry of alliances, it's survival in slow motion. You learn to spot when a treaty is simply a bandage over a festering wound, when an envoy's exaggerated respect hides a brewing rebellion, when a marriage alliance is just a velvet noose. Your instructors teach you that even the shape of a banquet hall can shift the balance of power. Curved tables make it harder to isolate enemies. Long, narrow halls create bottlenecks where you can control the flow of conversation. You realize your seating chart is often a battlefield of its own. Quirky universal tidbit: across many empires, sweet treats, especially honey cakes and candied fruits, were often used in diplomatic banquets to create a sense of shared joy. Because nothing softens political tensions quite like collectively licking syrup off your fingers. But beneath the smiles and the syrup, you never forget that diplomacy can sour overnight. You practice the skill of measured outrage, the strategic exit. Sometimes, your most powerful move is leaving a room in dignified silence, knowing your empty chair will say more than 1,000 furious words. You study the non-committal answer, how to say "we shall see" in 20 different ways, all of them polite, none of them binding. You memorize the art of delay, of sending ambiguous gifts that buy you time while your armies quietly reposition. Quirky fringe tidbit: some rulers sent exotic animals, like giraffes or peacocks, not just as gifts, but as diplomatic puzzles. Were they tokens of peace? Subtle insults? Tests of cultural knowledge? Historians still debate whether the receiving court always knew what to make of such bizarre offerings. And as you master this slow chessboard of glances and gestures, you realize that your power is not in what you can command. It's in what you can persuade, in what you can leave unsaid, in the delicate tension between smiling and snarling. Because even when you're locked in a room with velvet drapes and silver goblets, it's still war. The battles are quieter, the weapons are softer, but the stakes, they're exactly the same. Your throne, your legacy, your life. You've sharpened your mind, trained your body, mastered your tongue, and danced through diplomatic minefields. But there's still one last battlefield your royal education demands you conquer. The battlefield of stories. Because history isn't just something that happens to you, it's something you shape, control, and, if you're clever enough, write yourself into forever. Your tutors now press you to study how memory works, how to curate your image, how to build monuments that don't just honor victories, but carefully erase defeats. You're not just learning to rule, you're learning to become a legend. In Egypt, the pharaohs don't simply win battles, they immortalize them in sprawling temple reliefs, where the pharaoh is always bigger than his enemies, his bow always perfectly drawn, his face always serene. Never mind that sometimes the battle didn't go quite so gloriously. Quirky Egyptian tidbit. Some pharaohs literally chiseled out the names of their rivals from monuments, rewriting stone to erase enemies from memory. A kind of ancient cancel culture, except with hammers. Your education teaches you that public inscriptions are more than just decoration. In Persia, kings like Darius carved multilingual proclamations into towering cliffs, announcing their right to rule in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, so no one, absolutely no one, can claim they didn't hear him. Historians still debate whether these proclamations were widely read by the people or were mainly staged for posterity and the gods. Quirky Persian tidbit? Some scholars think that the precise placement of these cliff carvings, often on mountainsides barely reachable by human feet, wasn't just about grandeur, it was strategic. You couldn't easily deface what you couldn't easily climb. The Greeks take another route. They tell their stories in plays, in statues, in poetry passed from city to city. You learn that to control your story, you must control your storytellers. You must sponsor playwrights, host festivals, commission statues that cast you in the perfect light, preferably a light that catches your jawline just right. Quirky Greek tidbit? Athenian generals sometimes paid to erect statues of themselves while they were still alive. A marketing move that makes modern social media influencers look almost shy. But historians still argue whether the plays sponsored by leaders were truly propaganda, or whether the fiercely independent Greek playwrights used those stages to mock their patrons in code. So even in carefully staged public stories, you might still find yourself the butt of an elaborate, very well-acted joke. In Rome, your education drills into you the importance of legacy architecture. Arenas, temples, roads, all stamped with your name. You learn that the road to immortality is sometimes paved with very literary stone. Julius Caesar's commentaries? Oh yes, they're battlefield dispatches, but they're also brilliant self-promotion, painting him as Rome's tireless servant. Always a little bit reluctant to seize power, always somehow the hero. Quirky Roman tidbit? Emperors often inserted themselves into the genealogies of gods, tweaking their family trees to conveniently sprout divine ancestors. Oh look, turns out my great-uncle's cousin's neighbor's dog walker was Mars, the god of war. Historians still argue whether the Roman populace truly believed these celestial connections, or simply played along because, well, it was safer to nod and smile. In China, your royal tutors guide you through the delicate craft of dynastic chronicles. Here, the pen can heal as well as harm. You learn how emperors commission official histories that emphasize their virtue, downplay rebellions, and carefully frame disasters as cosmic warnings that were swiftly corrected under their wise hand. Quirky Chinese tidbit? Some emperors were so obsessed with the heavenly image they once burned entire court archives when the records didn't flatter them enough, leaving future historians to puzzle through the narrative gaps. Historians still debate whether these official histories genuinely reflect the pulse of the empire, or if they're more like the ancient equivalent of a heavily filtered Instagram feed, showing only the good angles, cropped carefully to hide the mess. But what's most fascinating in your education is how you're taught to use stories not just to glorify yourself, but to control the future. In ancient India, kings aligned themselves with epic heroes like Arjuna and Rama. They sponsor recitations of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, subtly weaving themselves into those sacred tales, painting their own lineage as part of the eternal cosmic order. Quirky Indian tidbit: some royal courts had dedicated storytellers whose entire job was to weave the ruler into existing myths. A human PR machine that worked in rhyme and rhythm. Historians still argue whether this tactic truly cemented royal authority, or if rival factions simply spun competing stories, creating a kind of mythological arms race. And just when you think you've mastered all the ways to carve your name into history, you stumble into a strange little corner of royal education: the training in failure. You're shown that sometimes the most powerful story is the comeback story. That sometimes you must lean into your defeats to claim moral victory. Your tutors tell you of kings who survived exile, who lost battles but won hearts, who stumbled but stood again. Because sometimes history loves a bruised but unbroken hero more than a flawless conqueror. Quirky universal tidbit: across cultures, defeated kings often commissioned art showing them as peaceful philosophers in old age. A tactical rebranding from warlord to wise man. A pivot from swords to scrolls. So you learn to leave your story open-ended, to carve it in stone, yes, but to whisper it in poems, to pass it in scrolls, to wrap it in ritual, so that when the dust settles, people will remember what you wanted them to remember. Because in the end, a royal education isn't just about who you are. It's about who people think you are. And in the ancient world, reputation isn't just a social currency. It's the throne you build when your armies are gone, your palaces crumble, and all that's left is the echo of your name. And wouldn't it be a tragedy if the echo got your story wrong? You've learned to shape your story, to chisel your name into the bones of history. But even the best story needs a stage. And as your royal education nears its peak, your tutors guide you through one final sprawling lesson: how to build the world around you to support your power. Because monuments aren't just vanity projects, they're strategy. They're the quiet, immovable soldiers that keep speaking long after your generals fall silent. And your first lesson? Cities. You don't just inherit cities, you redesign them. The Greeks build their agoras with deliberate openness. Market squares doubling as political theaters, where the people can see and be seen. The layout of Athens, with its temples perched dramatically on hills, isn't just pretty architecture. It's a power move. Historians still argue whether Pericles' grand building programs were sincere religious offerings or a shrewd way to consolidate control by giving the people beautiful things they didn't dare criticize. Quirky Greek tidbit: some temples were built with optical illusions, subtly curved columns that appear straight from a distance. Because even stone can lie if you know how to shape it. In Egypt, your capital isn't just a seat of power, it's the navel of the cosmos. The pharaoh's palace aligns with sacred river bends, with star paths, with the cardinal points. Because the ruler isn't just managing taxes, he's holding the universe together. The symmetry of the palace reflects the order of the heavens, and every hall you stride through feels like stepping into the architecture of the gods themselves. Quirky Egyptian tidbit: the avenue of the sphinxes connecting Luxor and Karnak temples was essentially an ancient royal catwalk, where processions showcased not just religious devotion, but the ruler's personal grandeur. Historians still argue whether these processional routes were genuinely spiritual pilgrimages or carefully orchestrated public displays of power. Giant, slow-moving parades of "Look at me, I control the sky and the street." In Rome, your education teaches you to think like a builder of eternity. You'll oversee aqueducts, roads, amphitheaters, all practical, all visible. The aqueducts bring water, sure, but more importantly, they bring you into the daily lives of the people. Every time they take a sip, they remember you built the pipeline. Quirky Roman tidbit? Victorious generals in Rome sometimes funded bathhouses as a public relations stunt. Because nothing says, "I'm a generous ruler," quite like sponsoring a place where people can relax, gossip, and scrub their backs in your name. Historians still argue whether these public works projects were genuinely altruistic or just tactical investments in social loyalty, keeping the masses happy so they wouldn't, revolt. In Persia, your education immerses you in the art of imperial cities. Persepolis isn't just a royal seat, it's a stage set. The grand staircases, the impossibly high platforms, they elevate the ruler, literally, so that foreign envoys must crane their necks to address the king. You learn to manipulate space itself, to make those who approach you feel small, and those who stand beside you feel grand by association. Quirky Persian tidbit? Some scholars believe a dazzling backdrop for royal pageantry that conveniently kept real governance elsewhere. In China, your royal education in architecture and city planning takes you into the deeply symbolic. The Forbidden City isn't just where you live, it's a microcosm of the universe. The number of courtyards, the arrangement of gates, the orientation of roofs, all meticulously designed to reflect harmony, hierarchy, and cosmic order. Quirky Chinese tidbit? The Forbidden City's bricks were supposedly baked for years and polished with glutinous rice to make them exceptionally strong. Because nothing says, "I plan to rule forever," like rice-fortified masonry. Historians still argue whether the common people actually perceived this imperial order as divine, or whether they saw through the spectacle and simply played along for survival. But your education doesn't stop at physical spaces. You're taught how to build institutions, schools, courts, councils, that carry your influence forward even when you're not there. You don't just build cities, you build systems. In ancient India, you're schooled in the delicate weaving of caste, religion, and bureaucracy. You sponsor temples not only to please the gods, but to anchor your rule within sacred geography. You patronize scholars and scribes, creating a knowledge class loyal to you because, well, you sign their paychecks. Quirky Indian tidbit? Some kings commissioned poetry that likened their cities to cosmic mountains or lotus flowers, wrapping urban planning in layers of spiritual metaphor. Historians still argue whether this divine urban branding genuinely unified diverse kingdoms or if it served mainly as poetic window dressing for more mundane political consolidation. Across these empires, your tutors remind you that a palace isn't just where you sleep. It's a theater, a fortress, a nerve center. It must awe, but it must also defend. You learn to walk the long, echoing halls, where footsteps announce you, where sunlight filters through high windows, just enough to halo your presence, but never blind your guards. You learn to stage manage your arrival, how many steps to descend, where to pause, how to let your robe catch the light just so. Because even the stone beneath your feet is part of your performance. And it's not just about impressing your own people. You build for your enemies. A visiting envoy must walk past your towering statues, your inscribed pillars, your sprawling plazas, not just to reach you, but to understand you, to feel your weight before you even speak. Quirky universal tidbit? Across cultures, rulers often made incoming foreign delegations wait hours or even days before granting an audience. A slow-cooked intimidation tactic disguised as royal scheduling. Historians still argue whether these calculated delays were intended to unnerve the visitors or simply the byproduct of chaotic, overbooked royal calendars. As you glide through your palace, as you ride through your city, you realize your education has come full circle. You aren't just the ruler of people, you're the ruler of perception. You build cities that outlast your body. You inscribe stories that outlast your breath. Your throne may be made of wood, but the world you build around it, that's what makes you unforgettable. So now you've walked the marble halls, commanded the legions, studied the stars, and orchestrated the very layout of your empire. You've been forged in the fire of royal education. But here's the final twist your tutors save for last. Even when you've mastered every lesson, even when your cities gleam and your armies obey, the throne is still a chair surrounded by quicksand. Because no amount of knowledge, no stack of scrolls, no polished sword can teach you how to predict every human heart. Power is never static. It flows, slips, and pulses through the people around you. And as you grow into your royal role, your greatest challenge isn't learning anymore. It's watching. Your final lessons are the softest and sharpest. You learn to watch people the way you once watched the stars, looking for shifts, patterns, threats wrapped in silk. At your banquets, you begin to notice who drinks a little too quickly, who laughs a little too loudly, who always leaves before dessert. These aren't just odd dinner habits, they're signals. In royal courts from Rome to China, a misplaced laugh could be the first crack in the dam. Quirky Roman tidbit? Some patricians trained their children to recognize micro-expressions, the quick flash of fear you triumph across a rival's face, to help them survive Senate debates. Historians still argue whether these nonverbal power games were a formal part of elite education or a skill you simply picked up by surviving long enough to need it. You remember your tutor's warnings. The most dangerous blade is not the one pointed at your chest. It's the one passed to your enemy with your own unguarded words. In Persia, you learn to trade compliments like chess moves. In India, you master the diplomatic art of agreeing to everything and committing to nothing. In Greece, you realize that sometimes silence in the agora shouts louder than a speech. And in Egypt, you learn that the stiffness of your posture can either affirm your divinity or betray your exhaustion. Royal children practice stillness the way others practice swordplay, because even fidgeting can look like weakness when you're supposed to embody cosmic order. Quirky Egyptian tidbit? Some pharaohs reportedly had attendants whose sole job was to adjust their robes and jewelry mid-ceremony, so the ruler always appeared untouched by the petty inconvenience of gravity. Historians still argue whether this royal perfectionism was for religious awe or just a theatrical obsession with controlling every flicker of public perception. But despite all your preparation, all your training, your life on the throne is a chessboard where not every piece obeys. Some days you rule, some days you merely appear to. Your education has taught you that war and etiquette and astronomy all fold together into one endless game. And some of the game's hardest players aren't warriors, they're your siblings. Your advisors, even your childhood friends. You remember the stories of Alexander, educated by Aristotle, conquering half the known world, only to watch his empire fracture like glass the moment he died. All that genius, all that planning, and still, his successors tore it apart in their scramble for a share. You remember the cautionary tale of Nero, trained by one of the finest philosophers, yet collapsing into chaos and paranoia. All that potential, all that tutoring, wasted. You remember Cleopatra, whose education in languages, economics, and court maneuvering made her one of the most formidable rulers in history. Yet she too was eventually outplayed by the grinding gears of Roman ambition. Your tutors leave you with one final unspoken lesson. Education can prepare you for the throne, but it can't save you from it. Quirky universal tidbit: across centuries, royal children often kept pet animals, not just for company, but as secret practice in trust, patience, and sometimes loss. Historians still argue whether these animal companions were innocent pets or quiet training grounds for future rulers, learning to nurture and to let go. So as you sit in your golden chair, you realize what all those star maps, sword drills, etiquette manuals, and war games have been pointing to. Survival is never about perfect knowledge. It's about flexibility. It's about reading the moment and bending, sometimes faster than anyone expects. You remember how your first lessons were in language, how to speak, how to listen. And now maybe you speak a little less. Maybe you listen more. Your royal education never ends. Even now, you're still learning. From the walls, from the silence, from the way a servant's eyes flick to a rival just a second too long. And somewhere deep inside, you realize you were never just learning to rule. You were learning to endure. Your cities may crumble. Your armies may falter. But if you've listened closely, if you've paid attention, you've built something stronger than stone. A legacy. The people who remember your name. The stories they'll tell. The libraries that will house your victories and your mistakes. Quirky closing tidbit: in ancient China, it was believed that even the dust of an emperor's tomb could influence the luck of future dynasties. Some say it still does. Historians still argue whether royal education created better rulers or simply prolonged the inevitable power struggles that would come either way. And as your palace grows quiet, as the candles burn low, you lean back in your throne and exhale. You've survived the lessons. You've survived the tutors. You've survived yourself. And now you rule. The halls you've walked tonight are starting to fade, their marble floors softening into shadow. Their high windows melting into the quiet of the evening. The weight of crowns, the scratch of scrolls, the clink of armor. They all begin to loosen, like a story slowly setting you down. You've seen the games royal children played, the impossible lessons they learned, the thrones they both inherited and defended. Some of them survived the gamble of empire. Some became legends. And some slipped through the cracks, their names swallowed by time like dust in the corner of a forgotten palace. But you've walked with them. You've felt the cold handle of the sword, the soft edge of a silk sleeve, the heavy silence of court chambers where even your breathing had to be precise. You can let that all go now. The lessons will wait for you. The scrolls can close. The footsteps can grow distant. It's time to rest. The stars you charted, the cities you built, they'll hold. The weight of the empire is always there. But for tonight, you can set it down. The chair soften beneath you, the way a throne never did. Let the palace walls blur until they feel more like clouds. The hard edges of the world slowly smoothing out around you. The tutors, the generals, the whispers, they all fall quiet now. And you can finally, peacefully close your eyes. Good night. Nightfall History.